Okay, great. Can you see that, Lori?
Yes, that looks great.
Great. Well, great. Well, thanks everybody for joining me today. I'm Chris Capistran from Cobalt. Cobalt is a CRM partner. We also have been serving the association and membership space since we started. Actually, November is our 20th anniversary. So we started in November of 1996. We're coming up on our 20th anniversary. So we've been working a lot with trade associations and other membership-based groups. We are headquartered in Alexandria, Virginia, which is right outside of Washington, D.C. There happen to be a lot of associations and membership-based organizations here in the nation's capital. So I personally have been working with CRM since the CRM 1.2 version came out. Some of the younger staff here like to laugh at me with my CRM 1.2 certifications from 2004 hanging on my wall, but we definitely here at Cobalt have a pretty deep expertise in both the association and membership space as well as CRM. So hopefully I can provide some insight today on the topic of membership data. As Lori mentioned, please feel free to type questions in throughout. I'm going to keep this at a reasonably high level with a few deep dives sprinkled in along the way. But if you have questions that are contextual, please feel free to type those in. If you want more of a discussion, I do have some time. Should have a little bit of time at the end for that. Lori's also going to post a couple of polls into the meeting just to get, this is more for the SIG in general, to just try to figure out where people are at with CRM and how they're using it to manage their membership data. So that said, we'll go ahead and jump right in.
All right, I did go ahead and launch the first poll. The answers are just coming in, so I will close it here in 3, 2, 1, and share the results so everybody can see what's going on here. Looks like we have about 40% on 2015, 40% 2016, and the remainder on online, Chris.
Oh, great. Wow. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
So, good. So,
and then I'll do the second one here as well. We will launch it. Are you currently using CRM to manage your membership? Give you a second to answer. All right, and we'll close it again here in 3, 2, and 1. And sharing it with you all. Same kind of answers here. We have about 40% customized ourselves, 40% our partner helped us, and 20% we're using an ISV solution.
Okay, great. Excellent. Well, thank you everybody for that information. So let's jump into how to get the most out of your membership data in CRM. So I like to start with this excerpt from ASAE's magazine. So for those of you who don't know, ASAE is the American Society of Association Executives. We like to call it the Association for Associations. And this quote really gets at the heart of how difficult it is to attract and retain members. So if I told you this was a quote from a recent article, you'd probably think that this sounds pretty accurate based on the current trends and behaviors of younger audiences and millennials coming up. But the crazy thing is that this is actually an excerpt from their magazine from 1989. So the reason I started with this quote is to really talk about the fact that attracting and retaining members being a challenge is not new. It's been around for a long time, and every decade has its new challenges that come along. But this doesn't mean that we have to approach it in the same way. So we have a lot of tools and techniques available today that we didn't have in 1989. So in today's webinar, my goal is to show you how you can use these tools to get the most out of your membership data and your investment in the CRM platform. I'm going to, as I said before, I'm going to tackle this mostly from a high level, but I'll add in some examples and a few deep dives based on our experience here at Cobalt. In some cases, I'm going to refer to dynamic communities and some of the work we've done for them over the past 2.5 years. Dynamic Communities is running on our membership management platform. So, in a recent survey that was conducted by ASI, ASI makes the software IMIS, which, if anyone's been in the association management software for a long time, you've either used IMIS or at least heard of it. They did a big poll of a lot of their customers and other associations and found that 21% of them didn't know their member retention rate, and that 25% of them didn't know what their market share was for their membership. So I'm sure that if we really pressed all of these groups, that a decent amount of the 21% could probably figure out at least a rough number for retention rate. But the fact that 1 in 4 associations didn't know their market share of potential members is pretty staggering. As an example, Cobalt works with the National Association of Realtors and many of their state and local organizations. In general, 50% of licensed real estate agents are actually realtors. I'm sure based on all the advertising and PR that they do, you probably thought that number was a lot higher. But in working at the local level, these groups not only know their market share, but they actually maintain a list of all the real estate agents who aren't realtors so they can actively market to those individuals. So this is kind of an extreme example of somebody really understanding and knowing their member market share and having action to do something about it. Real estate's reasonably cyclical and nomadic, so for a large number of people in the profession. So these groups constantly have to work to ensure they maintain their member numbers year over year. So the bottom line here is you can't take any action if you don't know the numbers. So that's what we'll start talking about next. So when we talk about an investment in CRM, at Cobalt we always like to talk about what we call the CRM Lifecycle. Now I don't know if we actually made that up or, but this is sort of the wheel that we use to talk about the life cycle of a CRM, and really one of the main benefits of having a CRM system is that it allows you to acquire your data, analyze the data, and then adapt based on the analysis of the data. This is key when you're dealing with anything. Collecting the data doesn't do you any good if you don't analyze it, and if you analyze it and then don't do anything about it, then you may as well not have collected it in the first place. So now that we sort of have a general idea of how important data is and why we should pay attention to it, let's talk about what I call the big three of membership-based organizations. We've got member acquisition, member retention, and market share. So member acquisition, this is pretty straightforward. How many new members are you bringing monthly, quarterly, annually, depending on how you like to track it. And as we'll talk about throughout the session here today, this number is really difficult to do anything with without some additional context. So historical numbers are very helpful with this one in particular so that you can analyze trends. Member retention is another key number. In the commercial world, we often talk about the fact that it's 5 to 10 times more expensive to acquire a new member than it is to retain a current customer. So a lot of people surprisingly struggle with this number, but member retention is pretty easy to calculate. It's really just the total number of members you have at the end of a period, let's say a year, and you subtract the new members and then added during that period, and then you divide it by the number of members at the beginning of the period. So it's basically all the people that renewed from the previous cycle. We often have customers that talk about year-over-year growth. Year-over-year growth is great. Our membership grew 20% over the last 5 years. That's a great number, but it doesn't always tell the whole story, and you may be missing some hidden issues or challenges or even opportunities. So this is why we like to go deeper and do a little analysis. So an easy example is Association A and B both have 1,000 members in 2015 and 1,200 at the end of 2016. So they've got a net gain of 20%. On the surface, they seem to be identical. But if we start to dig deeper, you're going to find that Association A had 700 members renew and 500 new members to get to their 1,200. But B had 900 renew and 300 new members to get to their 1,200. So these groups are very different. A's retention rate is 70% and B's is 90%. So they're both doing good jobs bringing in new members, but A might want to dig deeper into why they're losing members at such a high rate. If they can bump their retention rate up, then they would be able to do even better than that 20% year-over-year growth. So market share, this seems pretty simple, but it's one of the harder things to quantify depending on your organization or the industry you serve. The first thing and the most challenging is to define your market. Who is the actual entire makeup of people that could be prospective members? If you serve a specific industry like the realtors, this is pretty straightforward. But if your organization has a wider audience or a more horizontal focus, this can be more difficult. But knowing this number really helps you hone your efforts and figure out where you stand. The reason I tout these as the big three is that they're not only indicators of your organization's overall health, they're interconnected. You can't really analyze how you're doing in terms of member acquisition if you don't know your market share. Maybe your acquisition is slowed in the past 3 years because you have a 95% market share. So a low member acquisition rate or a declining member acquisition rate might mean nothing if you're almost topped out on market share. Maybe it's time to look at new markets or new types of memberships or new products and services. So that's sort of my big three. I call those the basics. As a membership-based organization, my belief is at a minimum you should have a handle on these 3 items before you start to go a little bit deeper. So let's jump right in and go a little bit deeper. Member engagement. That's the buzzword. It's been the hot topic for associations for the past 5 years. Everyone's scrambling to figure out both better ways to engage their members and to then quantify and track this engagement. So on this slide, I'm showing, this is a screenshot from yesterday on the CRM UG website. This is their report of this week's most active members. These numbers are pulled directly from the HireLogic platform, which runs the CRM UG community. It's based on level of participation, wide range of activities. So many vendors, including Cobalt, have their own way of tracking and calculating member engagement. But to me, this is really only a means to an end. Assuming that you've got reasonable formulas and weighting and et cetera, we really only care about 3 things. Relative scores. So it doesn't matter on this that Larry has 206 points. What would really matter is that 206 points means that he's in the top 10% of all CRM UG members. Also very important are trends over time. So maybe Larry is top 10% for 6 months and then he drops down to 0. Well, what happened there? Did Larry stop using CRM? Did he change jobs? You want to really dig into these trends, especially if they impact, this is an individual example, but if they impact categories or groups of members, it's important to see why they're changing over time. And then finally, and I think most importantly, is what does this score mean in relation to other numbers? And we'll talk about that a little bit in a few minutes. So we talked about there's all different ways to track this and get a handle on it. There are several other vendors in what we call the AMS, or Association Management Software space, that have created their own proprietary scoring methods to quantify member engagement. But when we decided to add this feature to CRM, we wanted to make it a little more generic and a little more open and configurable. So to do this, we leveraged a great feature in Dynamics CRM, which is the custom activity type. So for those of you who have never used this before, CRM allows you to create custom entities with a type of activity. And what this does is it allows you to essentially create your own activities that behave and are usable just like the out-of-the-box tasks and phone calls, and email, etc. So those include things like adding them to queues, tracking ownership, assignment. But the most important thing to us was the fact that you could use the regarding relationship in CRM. So what this allows you to do is create records that are activities that are related to any entity in CRM, including your custom entities. So using this as the starting point, we created an engagement activity entity as well as an engagement activity type entity. The type is really there just to allow us to categorize activities and add properties to an activity based on the type. In this example, you'll see here, this is an engagement activity for attending an annual meeting. So you've got the customer, you've got the regarding, which is looking up to the actual 2016 annual meeting. The type is meeting attendance, and that allows us to really track the general information about that. There's also two other very important fields that we include here. The first and most obvious are the points. So anytime you're doing any engagement scoring, you need to have some way to assign points to the activity. But we had to also add revenue as an optional field as well, so that you could actually roll in the amount of money, if there was money associated with this activity. And the reason we really did this was a philosophy we had of keeping everything configurable and flat. So when I say flat, I mean that you can create these activities based on all the interactions you have with a customer and then easily report against them because they're all in one place. So anyone who's ever tried to build reports or dashboards or even advanced finds in CRM, the more you try to or have to bring in data from multiple places and multiple sources, the more difficult and complicated it gets, and sometimes it's actually just impossible. So by flattening the data out, it makes it a lot easier to report on and view in CRM. So Dynamic Communities was actually one of our first customers to take advantage of this concept. So you all remember that leaderboard on the previous slide. That's really only part of the picture when it comes to CRM UG engagement. That's showing the community activity, but it doesn't factor in other activities like attending a meeting or this webinar. So in order to resolve this, we did a few things. First, we worked with Higher Logic, who built the community platform, to push a notification to CRM every time someone does something on the community, so we could create an engagement activity. This includes a new thread, replying to a thread, writing a blog post. I believe now signing up for chapter meetings is being done through Higher Logic's functionality, so we got written back as well. Now we have all the Higher Logic or community activities stored in CRM, and then we can create our own engagement activities based on, for non-community engagement, for things like registering for Summit or, again, signing up for this webinar. So that's kind of a high-level overview of one of the things that we did to track engagement with members for CRM UG and the other UGs. So real quick, I just want to go into the details here because while we added this to our solution, this is by no means proprietary or it's like it's not rocket science. It's a reasonably straightforward solution to this. So we actually set up the engagement activity entity and a series of workflows, and then customers can add their own workflows to actually create these activities based on events that happen in the system. So for the one we just saw, this is actually just based off of a meeting registration, which is one aspect of our system. When you mark somebody as attended a meeting, it fires off a workflow that creates an engagement activity, and then for best practices, we have things like we close the activity, we mark the workflow to succeed, or we cancel the workflow if for some reason the status, the attended flag was set to no. So again, just sprinkling in a few workflow best practices there. If you're writing workflows, you should always close them out. The stop workflow, people will skip that a lot, but it is best practice to include those stop workflow statuses. So that's just my my little best practices plug there from a workflow standpoint. So again, just a little bit more behind the curtain. When we actually create that activity, very simple, just like you do with any workflow in CRM, we're setting the subject line. In this case, we're setting the type. The regarding is being set to the actual meeting registration. So again, now we've got this nice lookup back to what the original event was. And then we're setting the points based on the points that are assigned to the meeting and the order total that's a roll-up field that we have on our meeting registration, which is the total of the orders tied to that meeting. So you get this nice picture of this is what happened, and it's all nice and flat and easily reportable. So that's just one example of what we've done to better manage and capture member data so that it's more usable in CRM going forward. So the next item I wanted to talk about when it comes to taking your data to the next level is Net Promoter Score. So I'm sure many of you have heard of Net Promoter Score before. Some of you might actually be using it. But I really love this metric because it's really brilliant in its simplicity. You ask customers, or in this case members, how likely are they to refer you to someone else on a scale of 1 to 10? A single question, very easy to ask. If you survey members and only ask this question, you'd be surprised at the response rate you get. Once you get the responses, you break them into 3 buckets. As you can see here, they're color-coded: detractors, passive, and promoters. So once you get all these groups together, you take your percentage of promoters, you subtract the percentage of detractors, and now you've got your Net Promoter Score. Again, the score is great, and a lot of companies love to tout how their Net Promoter Score is. USAA is always at the top. They have very high customer loyalty and a lot of promoters out there really pushing USAA's insurance products. But the Net Promoter Score really is only part of the story. We really believe, tracking this over time is really critical. So we have some customers with finicky membership bases. I'm sure some of you on the call can appreciate that. And so, a score of 50 might be really good. Maybe that's the best you could hope for. But if you know that your score is consistently 45 to 48, and all of a sudden you see a trend of it in, 39 or 40, well, now you need to look at something else because something might be wrong. Just like the member engagement numbers, context is really key here. And being able to link this to other data can really be enlightening. One of the things that a lot of people do when they see this is their first instinct is to figure out how to move all the 1s and 0s and 2s and 3s. How are we going to get all those guys up to 9s and 10s? Well, the bad news is most research has shown that it's wasted effort. In fact, this is why they lump 0 to 6 into one single category. I would argue, and a lot of other people would argue as well, that you should really focus on keeping your promoters happy and then looking for ways to turn your passives into promoters. If you do that, you might get a few of the 5 or 6s to move up the scale, but sadly the rest are probably lost causes, and the last thing you want to do is spend a ton of time and effort and money on 1s and 2s at the expense of losing some of your 9s and 10s. So that's really a classic, kind of a classic read of the Net Promoter Score, as people, they gravitate towards the negative and say, we want to get rid of all the 0s and the 1s and the 2s. If you do that, then you're probably designing programs or efforts that are going to hurt the people that are already happy. So, okay. So I've got a bunch of data. We've talked about 5 key metrics so far that can really help your organization. That's really only the tip of the iceberg. I mean, there's tons of other metrics you can track, but for the sake of this talk, I wanted to start with a certain subset. So now that I have this, what do I do with it? So I think one of the important things is that you need to start with just reviewing and tracking the actual raw data that you're collecting. So this might seem obvious, but a lot of people miss this. The first thing you should do is take advantage of the great dashboards that are in CRM. So from the poll earlier, seemed like the majority or everybody who answered the poll was on 2015 or 2016 or CRM Online. And if you're on CRM Online, you're definitely, I think there might be some stragglers still on the 2015 update 1, but everybody's 2015 or higher that answered the poll. So that means that you have access to the charts and the dashboards that come with CRM. Spending some time up front setting this up will pay huge dividends over time. Looking at these numbers, daily or weekly or monthly, they really give you a quick look at where you stand, and they allow you to quickly identify trends or problem areas that are coming. Establishing key performance indicators or KPIs can also help you track how you're doing against your predefined goals or metrics. At Cobalt, we use this across the board for all areas of our business, not just for our customers. In fact, we actually have flat screen monitors mounted throughout our office so that everyone in the company can see all of our KPIs across different departments, our implementation teams, our support teams, our sales and marketing teams. They can see that on a daily basis, which is great for the teams themselves to identify trends, but it's also a great way to get everyone in the organization to really understand how important data is. Another great feature that goes hand in hand with the dashboards are goals. So CRM has this great functionality around goals that can allow you to track things like member retention targets or registrations for an upcoming meeting. So a lot of our customers use this for their big annual conferences. I'm pretty sure that Dynamic Communities uses this for all of the summit events coming up, where you set some targets out there and you can track those goals against those targets. And the goals are great because they show you, what your target is and where you should be today versus that target. So it's a really great visual to power your day-to-day or week-to-week analysis. So once you've looked at the raw data, here's where I think it really gets cool. So I think I sent this out. I posted this on the community. I wrote a pretty brief blog post about this a couple months ago about I was trying to be salacious, so I used the term vanity metrics, that associations are only paying attention to vanity metrics and they need to dive deeper. That's mostly true, but in the world of blogging and marketing, you have to make it sound controversial to get more people to read it. But really what that comes down to is once you have all the data, you really need to dive deeper. And I like to say you need to challenge your gut. You've got some basic dashboards, but you can get so much more insight into your data if you start overlaying these metrics on top of each other. We talked about this earlier as we were sort of the basic metrics and these new next level metrics that we referred to. And I really believe that that's where you get the most bang for your buck out of data analysis. And you really need to look at these numbers with an unbiased eye. We all fall victim to this, especially if you've been working at the same organization or in the same industry for a long period of time. Pre-established notions of what the data is not really what it might actually be. So, for example, your gut might tell you that members that attend your annual conference are going to be the ones with the higher average engagement score versus the ones that don't attend. But what if you dig into the data and find out that's not really true? Especially if it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. If the engagement score you assign to your conference attendees is artificially high, then by default they're going to have the highest scores. So a lot of times we'll work with customers. You take that piece of data out when you're doing your analysis to really dig a little bit deeper. So what happens if you look at that and that really isn't true? So maybe you've got a really great online community, you've got great educational content that's available on demand, and those are where your engaged members are. They're very active in the community, they attend all the webinars. Maybe like Dynamic Communities, you've got local chapter meetings, maybe they're attending those, but then none of those people are going to your annual conference. I'm using Dynamic Communities as a parallel here in a hypothetical fashion, because I don't believe this is necessarily true. But what if you dig deeper on that and you find out that a lot of these people can't get away 4 or 5 days to go to Summit? What if you look at your renewal rates and you figure out that people with lots of years of experience or longevity in the industry stop renewing? Maybe that goes against your beliefs or your sort of pre-established notions, that you see a trend there. So those are some good examples of really digging deep and looking at different pieces of data to figure out where you might identify some trends. And I would argue that these aren't just issues or challenges, but they also are often opportunities. So a lot of times people do this analysis when things aren't going well. Oh, membership retention rate is down, or we're not acquiring as many members as we thought, or overall revenue is down for the organization. Let's dive deeper into the data. But a lot of times you don't find potential opportunities when things are going well. So revenue is up, membership is up, but maybe there are some of these other underlying issues, like renewal rates for people with more experience aren't as high, but those are being masked because you have a huge influx of young people. But in both these cases we just talked about, this is where this adapt phase of the life cycle really comes into play. So you've looked at the data, you've done some analysis, now you need to look at your programs and products and services and see how you can best address these challenges. So in the example I gave above, let's say Dynamic finds out that their most engaged members aren't signing up to go to Summit. Well, maybe that's an opportunity for them to create more regional events or to expand the local chapters so that they can attract some of people, because it's not as big of a commitment as going to something like Summit. So this keeps your members engaged and, of course, drives additional revenue. In the second example of the organization seeing some weird trends with more experienced people in their membership, they might want to look at educational programs that specifically target members with more than 10 years of experience. Or maybe they want to start a mentoring program, or even a certification or designation that is geared or targeted at more experienced practitioners, and maybe that would increase their retention rate, or potentially even attract some members back to the organization that had previously left. So again, these are somewhat hypothetical examples, but the key here is really to go deeper than the surface metrics so that you can gain some additional insight and make decisions based on the data. Of course, we always temper that. This doesn't mean that you should change direction constantly because something changes on your CRM dashboard. But you can use this to drive strategic direction, looking at new programs and products and services for the organization. So I hope this so far has sounded pretty good, but the big question I usually get is, how do I get started, or how do I change the way I've been working with my data so far to take advantage of some of this? So it's actually pretty simple. I'll warn you that when I say simple, that doesn't mean it's not time-consuming. But the most important thing that is surprisingly often overlooked is that you need to make sure you're capturing the data you need to do your analysis. So I know that sounds rudimentary, and some people, maybe borderline insulting, but I get this all the time in the last, again, I've been working with associations and membership-based organizations for a little over 18 years, and prior to that I worked at a trade association. So I've sort of seen this over and over again with our customers, where a customer comes to us with a requirement for a report, and they want to know X, Y, and Z about their members. But when we go to build the report, historically, they've only captured X. So we can't actually tell them that we can build, we have to tell them we can't build a report that includes Y and Z. So once you identify that, you've got to put mechanisms in place to get the data that you need. So you may take a look at this when you first start, and there may be metrics and numbers that you want to capture that you just currently don't have in your system. And that's pretty common. I'm not saying that as a, it's not that the organization was doing anything wrong up to that point in time, but if you decide that it's an important metric going forward, you obviously need to start capturing the support data. So that can mean that you should add more fields to your membership applications, profile updates on your website. Maybe you need to start a series of surveys. I would recommend, if you're doing some surveys, you sprinkle a Net Promoter in there as well. The great thing that you guys need to realize is that membership organizations have a huge advantage over commercial entities. You've got a captive audience, and you have regular interaction with them because they pay their dues. So even if they don't come back to the website on a frequent basis to update their information, you've got that, once a year, once a quarter, once a month, depending on how you run your due structure, you've got that audience to, or that opportunity to capture that information. So this is the perfect time for you to get the data that you need to do your analysis. So once you have that data, this is where CRM comes into play. As we talked about, dashboards are really powerful. At Cobalt, maybe we're a little more boring. We love Excel. Excel is so powerful, and you can do so much analysis with it by quickly pulling the data out of CRM. especially with the new Excel templates that were introduced in 2016. So for those of you who are on 2016, if you haven't used the Excel templates yet, you definitely need to start using that. It allows you to basically save all of your analysis, so pivot tables and charts and everything that you do. You can save those and rerun them at a later date on the same data set. It's hugely powerful. We've got a series of accounting reports that we've built for some of our intellectual property, and we transitioned all of those from SQL Server reporting services reports to Excel templates because they're so much more powerful and easier for end users to use. Of course, these are two really powerful tools, but when Microsoft starts adding Power BI into the mix, that's where you can really take your data analysis to a whole new level. You can bring in other data sources if you have data sources from other third-party applications that aren't integrated with CRM today. You can really start to get some really deep dive analysis into that. I'm not going to deep dive today on those tools. This was meant to be more of an overview session. We can do some follow-up sessions as part of this SIG, but Dynamic Communities also has a ton of resources around these areas, getting Excel and CRM together, and then they've actually got a separate new user group for Power BI as well that really seems to be gaining momentum and taking off. So if you guys are interested in that, there's tons of resources just on CRM UG and the new Power BI user group as well. So my last piece of advice in terms of getting started is I'm calling this establish a data culture for your team or organization. It sounds a little bit hokey, but as I mentioned earlier, here at Cobalt, we have these monitors around our office. In fact, each department manager actually has a monitor mounted outside their door with all their key metrics and key performance indicators so that everyone can always see how that department is doing against the metrics that we track. This helps us track trends, yes, but more importantly, it shows everyone on the staff how important it is to pay attention to the data so that we can make informed decisions. And we use this constantly in all of our staff meetings, our quarterly meetings. We do an annual retreat meeting with the whole staff, and there's a whole section of it that's really driven off the power of data and how we make decisions off of that data. So if I could leave you with one thing there, I think if you get your team to really buy into that and adopt it, it also starts to spur this excitement of, oh, maybe I can track this and maybe I can analyze this, and you may uncover some additional opportunities that you didn't know that you should even be looking for. So I left about 10 minutes at the end here for questions, so I actually timed it reasonably well. So before I conclude, are there any questions out there? Lori, did you get any in the chat, or?
Yeah, I'm looking here. One that did come in is, what's the best way or any ideas to influence your management teams that establish a data culture? Should be a priority over attempting to create and do more for members, just because doing more seems to be where folks assume value is.
Right. I mean, I think the best opportunity is to lead by example and do some sort of small analysis and get a win. So not diverting a bunch of resources, but being able to do some quick analysis and show it as an example to say, hey, I bet we didn't know that this was actually the case, but I just took it upon myself to dig into the data, and here's what I found. And I think that if you can show that type of an opportunity, then people will be hungry for, especially if you can show, we have customers that start with simple things like show how you can create a marketing list to target people that haven't yet signed up for an upcoming event that's bringing in revenue. So all the people that registered last year that haven't registered this year, that's a way of grabbing data. and then market to those people. And then if you pick up an extra 5 or 10 registrants from that effort, now you've got sort of an internal case study to make your case to management, and you're going there with money in hand, so to speak, to say, hey, we got 10 additional people to sign up for this meeting as a direct result of sending out these emails. So, I don't know, that's just off the top of my head. I was like, as somebody who's in management myself, we always ask people to do some proof of concept on anything they want to do. So I think that, that's really a powerful way to do it. So.
Yeah, that's a great point. I did post just in the chat, if you would like to ask a question live, just remember you can raise your hand and I'll quickly unmute your line so you can ask it over to Chris. It's nice to have a live question, always nice to have a voice on the line. So raise your hand if you'd like to ask a question. I am not seeing any other questions at this time, Chris.
Okay.
We'll give it a moment here. As Chris mentioned early too, we will have the deck and the recording. We'll get it posted to our content library within a couple hours here. So look for the link to come in your inbox if you're registered for the event to share with others in your organization. Let's see. Go ahead.
We'll start. We'll start on the SIG itself. Let's start up some more conversation around this topic. And I think people learn by sharing and practical examples of things that we've done. So I think that that's always good as well. So we'll get the conversation started on the thread. There's a bunch of people here at Cobalt that are pretty active on the community as a whole. So hopefully we can chime in. You can chime in. If you've got partners that you work with, encourage them to chime in, and we'll take it from there.
Great. Good point. Friends and family,
yeah.
invite
and of course, always feel free. Connect with me on the community. Reach out to me directly. I'm always interested to talk. I promise I won't try to sell you anything. So even though it goes against, so just reach out to us and we'll go from there. And then I'm putting my plug in for Summit. For Lori is that Summit is coming up in October. If you haven't been before, it's awesome. We go there as a partner, but we actually I think we're bringing 8 or 9 people from our staff. A bunch of them are just coming to attend the educational sessions, and we're a CRM partner. So our staff gets a lot out of just the sessions that are put on. Some of the best sessions are put on by the customers, the end users themselves. That's what I really love about this conference, is that you're getting practical day-to-day stuff from end users. It's a great conference. So that's my unsolicited plug of the Summit conference. So.
And that's the best kind of plug. Thank you, Chris. Yes, Summit is going to be great. I'll go right back on you and just tell all that we do use Cobalt internally to manage what we do within the UGs here, and couldn't do it without Cobalt. So it works both ways. But yes, we're definitely excited for Summit, and check out Cobalt at Summit. At this point, I think we'll go ahead and wrap up, Chris. But as always,
Great.
Thank you for your time. Thank you for sharing your expertise with all. And let's keep this going. Let's engage within the community forum and keep this going between all that are attending. So thank you all for attending, and have a great day. We look forward to seeing you on the next webinar.